Dale.
Hello, everyone present. Today, the Connor team present the social housing project in Lima, Peru. The exhibitors Eric Lau, Eduardo Peláez, and Angelo Coarit. We will talk about this process of social housing in Lima, Peru in 6 stages. In the table context, we know that housing is one of the important elements when defining the living condition of the population. Taking as a result since 1930, the working class neighborhood, we present 4 representative cases. Barrio Vero 1, Barrio Vero 2, Barrio Vero 3, and Barrio Vero 4. In Lima, the working neighborhood will be the massive housing solution to accommodate the large population demand of the working class in industry, construction, and commerce. Its origin be diverse, planned or not, as well as in the management modalities, public, private, or simply legal. In the next stage is the unidad vecinal. In the unidad vecinal, there are 6 representative cases. Unidad vecinal 3 or UV3, unidad vecinal Angamos, unidad vecinal Miraflores, Rímac, Mirones y unidad vecinal Matute. Few neighborhoods in Lima have been planned as a classic unidades vecinales. They were built to make Lima City with higher density. The unidades vecinales were convinced the autonomous housing complex for this reason. They had markets, medical posts, police station, cinemas, communal premise, post office, primary school, and with their own pedestrian and vehicular circulation system. The idea of this project was to make the mini cities. That is a solution in that time. In parallel, it was happening the informal urbanism or informal housing.
So, meanwhile, many beautiful modern housing complexes were built by the national government. Many other people were claiming for more low-cost housing projects or at least some space to build their own houses. Many of them came from rural areas by a big wave of rural migration from the 20s to 60s. So this informal land occupation was constituted as another way of city making. Um, a person just need a mat, like in the next slide, as you can see. A person just need a mat and some sticks to make a property or a house. And also this is possible because of Lima's weather. The weather of Lima is not very hot in summer and it's not so cold winter. So this kind of moderate temperature gives you the possibility to have a house without some specific kind of isolations. But the most important part of this was that many people were so very well organized in order take the position of a specific land. And some squatters who won this kind of fights against many policies. Some properties or some people just put a Peruvian flag and also a handmade billboard in order to commemorate the occupation of that land. But as you can see in the picture of the left side, there were many other people just dreaming or waiting for another opportunity to to have a land to occupy. So at the same time as well, many other of those modern buildings were built. In this case, more housing complexes were built with amazing spatial design and following with all the basic rules of the modern architecture of that period. But this is a very interesting thing because during the process of the construction of those buildings, that you can see in the right side, this is Fernando Belaunde. Fernando Belaunde was our president, or was the president of Peru from 1965 to almost 1970. But our president was also very concerned about the fate of many people who don't have a house to live. So that's why Fernando Belaunde and Peter Lang of the United Nations designed a strategy for mass housing and an alternative to the massive informal settlements that were dramatically taking place in Lima during those periods. They launched an international competition and invited 26 architects, 13 architects from Peru, and the other 13 architects from many other parts of the world. And also, this is some amazing part because Peru was the point to, if we have to think about how should be the future of the social housing around the world, Peru was the place, the headquarters for that. But at that moment, the military group took the power of the government and paused many projects. So the winner project of that, the Previ or the experimental low cost housing project, couldn't be materialized in the whole land. So at the end, they decided to just to construct all the proposals that were presented in that competition, and you can see many of these proposals like a huge patchwork of different designs. And in the next slide, also you can see the contrast of the idea and to the reality. In that case, James Stirling proposed a project in which you can, or the house can grow around a patio. In the right side, you can see in the house with almost 3 stories, people just hanging out. So finally, also there is a book that is Time Builds, designed and written by Chilean architects, and they also make a very interesting contrast between those years when the houses were just built and the reality with nowadays, in which you can see how all the houses uh, grow a lot. Now they are having like a very special identity for each one. Okay.
Okay, with the entrance of the military government, it was there was a change of perspective in addressing the housing problem. In fact, the military government prioritized the addressing the problem of the informal settlements, while they were considered illegal in previous government. The military government changed that perspective and allowed them negotiate with them, and also help them in the final stage to help them to settle and to organize them. So there was a change of perspective. The government didn't build more housing projects, stop the production of housing projects, and instead help the community in improving their neighborhood by providing them connections to roads and to service and construction of services and infrastructure. This perspective was based on the barriada of the on the Ley de Barriadas Act, that took the idea or the approach of a self-help self-help construction of housing or progressive housing. That was the concept that was studied by John Turner and popularized by him around the world. Uh, we have taken two cases that follow this approach. The case of Villa El Salvador, uh, that basically the government grant or give the land to the settlers, to the dwellers, and organize the distribution of the different lots in there, assigning the spaces where some infrastructure will be constructed, like the services and, and the roads and other kind of services in there, and let the self community to organize themselves and to also to construct their own buildings and to decide how they use the space. This was the idea of the comunidad urbana autogestionaria, or a self-managed urban community. And this is the image and example of how it resolved the settle. And the second example we took is the idea, this is the case of Huaycan. Huaycan was designed in the late 80s and also follow the idea of the government giving the land and organizing the space with the basic, infrastructure, basic distribution, but allowing the people to self-organize themselves. In fact, they use an approach in organizing the space where they put an important or prioritize the interaction of the community. So they distribute the public spaces in a way that they can allow the interchange and the communication between the community, and allow the space to be a political space, a space that allows the community participation in there. This is an image of how this was the settlement at the beginning. And in the next slide, well, this is the same image bigger, but here we have how this is, well, not now, but in 2012, how is the current image of Huaycan. We may see it's a consolidated urban area with the distribution of the different construction there, but in fact, in the front, in the front, in the back of the picture, we can of the image, we can see that there is still some houses that are still developing in the slope of the mountain in there. That is the periphery of the zone of Huaycan. Eduardo?
So after having all these experiences with informal settlements, also the national government decided to reinforce the idea of constructing more social housing projects. So that's why they launched the National Building Company. And the main role of that enterprise was to promote, plan, finance, project, execute, and allot urban enabling programs, housing construction, complementary services, and all types of building within the national level. But the most interesting idea was that they started with an amazing building apartments, but they at the end had some traces again on the ground. And this is like a very simple idea of how a house was finally reduced.
And this leads us to a current context that began in the 90s with the global neoliberal trend. Uh, it started under the Fujimori era and imply the reduction of the participation of the government in the housing provision. In fact, during the 90s, Fujimori's government deleted the Ministry of Housing and neglected all the previous programs. One restated at the beginning of 2000, uh, the housing ministry. Uh, and this trend implied the or followed this neoliberal approach of liberalizing the market, including the housing market, and also giving a high degree of importance to the financial sector. So it implies a private provision of housing and the financialization of housing in our country. Private actors were put in the front of this sector, and they decided what, where, and how many houses will be constructed. To address the necessity of the poorest part of the population, the government intervened by a subsidy system that was integrated to the financial housing market. Uh, in fact, this subsidy was not appointed, or is not appointed directly to the beneficiaries, to the buyers of the house, but is given through the private constructors and financial institutions. Here we have an explanation of how this subsidy work for acquiring new housing for people uh, that that prov- that provide that are from low income families. Uh, this basically consists in subsidizing the acquisition but being required to acquire private mortgage or unqualified to some requirements for these subsidies. These requirements are measured by an ABC system, an ahorro bono crédito, or savings, bonds, and credit. So basically, people is required to have some savings or to demonstrate their ability to save some amount of money. After that, they are beneficiaries of a subsidy of a bond, and that cover part of the acquisition of the housing, and the other part is covered by the acquisition of a loan, of a credit from a financial institution. And meanwhile, also the government applied the Soto's approach of formalizing informal settlements through titling programs. This in order to integrate those informal settlements to the housing market and to the financial system. Uh, this this context has led us to our current situation of the housing sector, and we have decided to show or to highlight three specific problems that has arose from that perspective. First of all, we are still having a housing deficit. It is estimated in approximately 1 million houses required to cover the society and the needs of the population. This deficit is measuring in lack of number of houses, the quantitative approach, and the qualitative lack of the lack of access to adequate houses or to houses served like by the required services. Uh, Also, this phenomenon, since the private sector has the power to determine the provision of housing, companies that deliver affordable housing as a low profit generator asset tend to reduce the cost of the construction and to maximize the number of units produced. So affordable housing is built in the cheapest land of the city, usually in underdeveloped land that has a lack of access to services, and that is usually located in the periphery of the city. This dynamic generates spatial segregation, inequalities, and exclusion. This image shows how this has been evolved. As we may see, the latest development is located in the periphery of the city. And finally, uh, even in cases where people cannot access to the housing market, to the formal provision of market, the urban poor is forced to settle in slums located in high-risk areas. And it's that where they may be victims for the land smuggling of land smugglers, and also the context of the settlement put their lives at risk. And this also generates spatial inequalities and this kind of and problems to access to or to integrate these people to the community or to the society. And this is the end of our presentation. We really hope you enjoyed that. We will see you on Saturday. Thank you very much.
Yes.